The ranch house sat like a scar on the hillside, all rough timber and gaps in the siding that let the wind howl through at night. Wade Mercer built it himself 15 years back when he thought hard work and money could fill up the hollow parts of a man. He was wrong about that, but by the time he figured it out, he'd already poured everything into 6,000 acres of scrubland, 200 head of cattle, and a reputation for being colder than a January creek. He wasn't always like this. There was a time, God, it felt like another lifetime, when Wade Mercer laughed easy and talked about building a family on this land. That was before Sarah got sick, before the fever took her in 3 days flat, leaving him with a half-finished house and the kind of silence that gets into your bones. The ranch hands learned quick not to ask personal questions. The townspeople learned to keep their pity to themselves. Wade learned that if you worked hard enough, dawn to dusk until your hands bled, you could almost forget what it felt like to want something you couldn't rope or brand. Almost. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Wade was in the barn fixing a busted gate hinge when Rudy, his foreman, came shuffling through the dust with an envelope. The older man's face had that pinched look that meant bad news, the kind of expression you wear when you have to tell someone their dog died. "This came from town," Rudy said, holding the envelope like it might bite him. "From that agency." Wade's jaw tightened. He wiped the grease off his hands with a rag that was already more stained than fabric, and took the letter. 6 months ago, in a moment of weakness he still couldn't quite explain, Wade had contacted a marriage agency out of Chicago. He told himself it was practical. The ranch needed a woman's touch. He needed someone to cook and mend and maybe make the place feel less like a tomb. That's what he told himself anyway. The truth sat deeper and uglier. Wade was tired of eating alone, tired of talking to horses because they were the only living things that didn't look at him like a charity case or a cautionary tale. Tired of waking up in a cold bed and remembering that Sarah's side hadn't been warm in 7 years. He tore open the envelope. The letter was short, typed on official letterhead with a signature he couldn't read. "Dear Mr. Mercer," it began, and Wade's eyes skipped down to the part that mattered. "We regret to inform you that Miss Evelyn Marrow, age 38, has been deemed unsuitable for placement due to advanced age and limited domestic prospects. Per our agreement, she will be returned to Chicago on the afternoon train. Your deposit will be refunded in full. We apologize for any inconvenience and encourage you to submit a new request with adjusted specifications." Wade read it twice, then a third time, slower, because surely he was missing something. Advanced age. Limited prospects. 38. He crumpled the letter in his fist and threw it hard enough that it bounced off the barn wall. Rudy took a step back, hands raised like Wade was a spooked horse. "Easy now." 38, Wade said, his voice low and dangerous. "They sent her all the way out here, put her on a train for 3 days, and now they're shipping her back because she's 38? Rudy shifted his weight. "Agency's got standards, I guess." "Standards?" Wade laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That what we're calling it?" The foreman didn't answer. What was there to say? They both knew how it worked. Women were inventory, assessed and sorted like cattle at auction. Too old meant used up. Used up meant worthless. It didn't matter if you could read or cook or survive a Montana winter. If the numbers didn't add up on paper, you got sent back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Wade had signed the papers. He'd agreed to their terms, sent his deposit, filled out their forms, asking what he wanted in a wife like he was ordering a plow from a catalog. And some part of him, the part that still remembered Sarah's face in the lamplight, had hoped that maybe, just maybe, the agency would send him someone real. Someone tired and rough-edged and done with pretending. Instead, they sent him a rejection letter. "When's the train?" Wade asked. Rudy checked his pocket watch. "Leaves in 2 hours. She's probably at the station already." Wade stood there in the barn dust, jaw working, hands opening and closing like he was trying to strangle something invisible. Every logical bone in his body told him to let it go. Take the refund. Submit a new request. The agency knew what they were doing. They'd been matching men and women for 20 years. Who was he to question their process? But logic had a way of shattering when you thought too hard about a woman sitting alone at a train station, holding a suitcase and a ticket back to nowhere knowing she'd been measured and found wanting. "Get the wagon," Wade said. Rudy blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Get the wagon. Wade, now hold on. I said get the wagon, Rudy, or I'll hitch it myself, and you can explain to the hands why I fired you. The foreman stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head and walked out, muttering something about fool cattlemen and death wishes. Wade didn't care. He was already moving, grabbing his coat off a nail, checking his pocket for the crumpled letter like he needed proof this wasn't some fever dream. The ride into town took 40 minutes. The wagon rattled over ruts and rocks, and Wade's mind raced faster than the horses. What the hell was he doing? He didn't know this woman. Didn't know if she could cook or clean or tolerate the wind that screamed down from the mountains 9 months out of the year. For all he knew, she was mean as a snake or dumb as a post. But she was 38, and some bureaucrat with soft hands and a stamp had decided that was enough to throw her away. The thought made Wade's blood hot. Town was quiet when they rolled in, just the usual afternoon lull, a few ranch wives buying thread, old men playing checkers outside the general store. The train station sat at the far end of the main street, a squat building with peeling paint and a platform that looked like it might collapse if you sneezed on it wrong. Wade saw her before he even climbed down from the wagon. She sat on a bench near the tracks, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. One suitcase beside her, brown leather worn white at the corners. She wore a gray dress that had been mended too many times and a coat that didn't quite fit. Her hair was pulled back tight, showing the lines around her eyes and mouth, lines that came from squinting into hard years, not smiling. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way men talked about beauty, all soft curves and blushing cheeks. She looked like every other woman who'd survived too much and stopped expecting kindness. Wade's boots hit the platform hard enough to make her look up. For a second, their eyes met. Hers were blue, pale, and wary, the kind of eyes that had learned to measure exits and calculate odds. She didn't smile, didn't stand. Just watched him approach like she was watching a stray dog, careful, ready to run if needed. "Evelyn Marrow?" Wade asked. She nodded once, slow. "And you'd be Wade Mercer." Her voice was lower than he expected, rougher, not unpleasant, just real. "I got the letter," Wade said, feeling like an idiot the second the words left his mouth. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "So did I." They stood there in the cold while the wind pushed dust across the platform. Wade became aware of eyes on them, Mrs. Pritchard from the boarding house peeking through her window, Tom Farley pausing mid-stride on his way to the feed store. Small towns had a way of making spectacle out of anything that broke routine. "I'm sorry they dragged you out here for nothing," Wade said finally, because it seemed like something needed to be said. Evelyn shrugged, a small, tired motion. "Not the first time I've been told I'm not good enough. Probably won't be the last." The flatness in her voice hit him harder than anger would have. This wasn't a woman raging against injustice. This was someone who'd learned to absorb the blows and keep moving. "Where will you go?" Wade asked. "Back to Chicago." "Don't have much choice." She glanced at the tracks. "Train comes, I get on. That's how it works." Wade's jaw tightened. What if it didn't? Evelyn looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for the punchline or the trap. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you staying." The words hung between them like smoke. Somewhere down the street, a horse whinnied. A door slammed. Normal life carrying on while Wade Mercer stood on a train platform and lit a match to every sensible plan he'd ever made. Evelyn stood up slowly, one hand gripping the bench like she needed to steady herself. "The agency rejected me." "I don't care what the agency says. They said I'm too old." "You look fine to me." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "You don't even know me." "No," Wade agreed. "But I know what it feels like when people write you off. And I know I didn't ride 2 hours into town just to watch you get back on a train because some clerk in Chicago thinks he knows better than I do what I need." Evelyn stared at him like he'd started speaking another language. "Why would you do this? You could get anyone, someone younger, prettier." "I don't want younger or prettier," Wade cut in, his voice harder than he meant it. "I want someone who knows what it's like to get knocked down and get back up. Someone who doesn't need their hand held through every hard day. Someone real." "You don't know if I'm any of those things?" "No. But you got on a train by yourself, crossed half the country to a place you'd never seen, knowing you might end up exactly where you are right now. That tells me enough." The train whistle sounded in the distance, low and mournful. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the tracks, then back to Wade. He could see her calculating, weighing risks and possibilities, wondering if this was hope or just another brand of trap. "What exactly are you offering?" she asked. Wade took a breath. "A place to stay. Work if you want it, cooking, mending, whatever needs doing. Pay if you need money to leave. And time. Time to figure out if this arrangement makes sense for both of us, not just some agency's idea of what makes sense. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll buy you a ticket to anywhere you want to go, no questions asked." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Wade forced himself to stand still, to let her look without flinching or trying to sell himself. This had to be her choice. If he pushed, if he begged, it would be just another version of the agency deciding her future without asking. "People will talk," Evelyn said quietly. "Let them. They'll say I'm taking advantage, or that you're a fool. They already say I'm a fool. At least this way I'll have someone to talk to over dinner." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "You always this reckless?" "Only when it matters." The train was visible now, a dark shape growing larger against the gray sky. In another 5 minutes, this conversation would be over. Evelyn would get on that train, or she wouldn't, and either way, Wade's life would never be quite the same. Evelyn looked down at her suitcase. "I don't cook fancy. I don't eat fancy. And I'm not good at pretending things are fine when they're not." "Good. I've had enough pretending to last a lifetime." She nodded slowly, like she was making a decision that went deeper than just train tickets and ranch houses. When she looked up again, something had shifted in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the faint possibility of it. "All right," she said, "I'll stay. For a while. We'll see how it goes." Wade felt something loosen in his chest, something he didn't have a name for. He reached for her suitcase. She pulled it back. "I can carry my own bag," she said. "Didn't say you couldn't." They walked to the wagon together, not touching, keeping a careful distance like two animals circling each other. Wade was aware of every eye on them. Mrs. Pritchard's scandalized gasp, Tom Farley's low whistle, the station master scratching notes in his ledger like he was recording history. Let them stare. Let them talk. Wade Mercer had spent 7 years building walls around himself, convincing everyone, including himself, that he didn't need anyone. And now, in the span of 20 minutes, he'd torn those walls down for a woman whose last name he barely knew how to pronounce. Rudy was waiting by the wagon, eyebrows somewhere near his hairline. "We taking a passenger, boss." "Miss Merrow will be staying at the ranch," Wade said, helping Evelyn up onto the seat. She didn't need the help, but she took it anyway, her hand rough and calloused against his. "Staying," Rudy repeated like he was testing the word. "For how long?" "As long as she wants." The foreman looked between them, then shook his head and climbed onto the back of the wagon. "Your funeral, boss." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Evelyn sat stiff and straight, hands folded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Wade drove, hyper-aware of her presence beside him, the way she breathed, the small adjustments she made when the wagon hit a rut, the fact that she didn't try to fill the silence with nervous chatter. He appreciated that. Sarah used to talk constantly, filling every gap with words. It was one of the things he'd loved about her, but also one of the things that made her absence so loud. Evelyn's silence felt different. Not empty, just reserved. "It's not much," Wade said as the ranch came into view. "The house needs work, and the wind gets mean in winter." "I've lived through worse," Evelyn said. He believed her. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Rudy hopped down and disappeared toward the bunkhouse, probably to spread the news to the other hands. Wade climbed down and offered Evelyn his hand again. This time she hesitated before taking it. "Where do you want me?" she asked. The question was practical, not suggestive, but Wade still felt heat climb his neck. "There's a room off the kitchen. It was meant to be, well, it's empty now. You can have it." Evelyn nodded and picked up her suitcase. Wade led her inside, acutely aware of how the house must look to her. Bare walls, dusty floors, furniture that was functional but joyless. He'd stopped seeing it years ago, stopped caring whether things matched or if the curtains had holes. Now, seeing it through her eyes, he felt a stab of something like shame. "Kitchen's through there," he said, pointing. "Pumps out back. Stove works, mostly. If it gives you trouble, Hit it on the left side. Evelyn set her suitcase down and looked around, taking inventory. Her face gave nothing away. I'll let you get settled, Wade said. If you need anything, I'll manage. He nodded and backed toward the door, feeling awkward in his own house. Dinner's at 6. Nothing fancy. Just, I'll figure it out. Wade left her there and walked out into the yard, suddenly aware of how fast his heart was beating. What the hell had he just done? Brought a stranger into his home on the basis of a crumpled letter and a gut feeling that probably had more to do with anger than sense. Rudy was leaning against the barn, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man watching a friend walk into a bear trap. You want to tell me what that was about? The foreman asked. Wade pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. No. You know people are going to talk. Let them. And you're just going to let some woman you don't know move into your house? She's not some woman. She's... Wade stopped, realizing he didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. She needed help. I helped. End of story. Rudy snorted. That's not the end of anything, and you know it. He was right, of course. This was the beginning of something, though Wade couldn't have said what. Trouble, probably. Complications. Questions he didn't have answers for. But standing there in the cold, watching the smoke start to curl from the kitchen chimney as Evelyn Marrow began making herself at home, Wade found he didn't care. For the first time in 7 years, the ranch house didn't feel like a tomb. That had to count for something. Evening came on slow and cold. Wade stayed outside as long as he could, finding excuses to check fences and hay stores and things that didn't actually need checking. When he finally forced himself back to the house, the smell of cooking meat hit him before he even opened the door. He found Evelyn at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She'd taken off her coat and rolled up her sleeves. Her hair was still pulled back, but a few strands had escaped and hung loose around her face. Stew, she said without turning around. Found some beef in the cold box and potatoes in the cellar. Hope that's all right. It's fine, Wade said. More than fine. They ate at the kitchen table, the silence between them less awkward than Wade expected. Evelyn ate methodically, no wasted motion, like someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. Wade found himself watching her hands. Scarred knuckles, short nails, the kind of hands that had worked hard their whole life. How long were you with the agency? He asked. Evelyn finished chewing before she answered. 6 months. They took women from the poorhouse where I was staying, said they could find us positions, husbands, better lives. Her mouth twisted. Guess my better life had an expiration date. The poorhouse, Wade repeated. In Chicago? St. Catherine's. I was a seamstress before that, but the factory closed. No work, no room, no money. You end up where you end up. Wade nodded slowly. He'd heard stories about the poorhouses, overcrowded, understaffed, places where people went to disappear. Must have taken guts to sign up with the agency. Didn't take guts? Took desperation. Evelyn met his eyes. I'm not here because I'm brave, Mr. Mercer. I'm here because staying in Chicago meant dying slow in a room with 30 other women, all of us waiting for something to change. At least this way I'm dying somewhere with a view. The bluntness of it hit Wade like a punch. You planning on dying anytime soon? We're all dying. Just a question of how fast. Wade set down his fork. You always this cheerful? You always this nosy? They stared at each other across the table. Then, to Wade's surprise, Evelyn's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. Sorry, she said. I'm not used to people asking questions. Usually they just tell me where to stand and what to do. I'm not most people. I'm starting to see that. They finished eating in a silence that felt, if not comfortable, at least less sharp. When Evelyn started clearing plates, Wade stopped her. You cooked? I'll clean. That's not house rule, Wade said. Whoever cooks doesn't clean. Evelyn looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Wade's expression must have told her it wasn't worth the fight. She nodded and stepped back, watching as Wade pumped water and started scrubbing dishes. This arrangement, she said after a while. What exactly do you expect from me? Wade kept his eyes on the plate he was washing. I expect you to decide if you want to stay or go. Everything else is just details. And if I stay, then we figure it out as we go. That's not much of a plan. No, Wade agreed, but I've found plans don't mean much when life decides to kick you in the teeth. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Your wife. The one who died. What was her name? Wade's hand stilled in the water. Sarah. How long? 7 years. You loved her. It wasn't a question, but Wade answered anyway. Yes. And you've been alone out here since then. Mostly. Evelyn nodded like that explained something. Grief's a bastard. Makes you do strange things. Is that what you think this is? Grief? Isn't it? Wade dried his hands and turned to face her. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of pretending I don't need anyone. Maybe I saw you on that platform and thought, there's someone who knows what it costs to keep breathing when everything hurts. And maybe... He stopped, surprised by his own honesty. Maybe I figured we could help each other stop hurting so much. Evelyn's eyes were unreadable. That's a lot of maybes. Yeah, it is. She stood there, arms crossed, measuring him again with those pale blue eyes. Finally, she nodded once. All right, Wade Mercer, we'll try it your way, but I'm telling you now, I'm not Sarah. I won't be her. I can't be. I don't want you to be, Wade said, and meant it. Good. Evelyn turned toward the hallway, then paused. The stew wasn't bad, was it? Best thing I've eaten in years. Her smile was small, but real. You must have been eating terrible food. She disappeared into her room, leaving Wade alone in the kitchen with clean dishes and a chest full of something he didn't quite know how to name. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Or both tangled up together so tight he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie like it always did. But inside, for the first time in a long time, Wade Mercer's house felt like it might someday become a home. The first week passed in a careful dance of avoidance and necessity. Evelyn cooked, cleaned, mended clothes Wade didn't remember tearing. Wade worked the ranch from sunup to sundown, coming in only when hunger or exhaustion forced him inside. They spoke when they had to, past the salt, pumps frozen again, storm coming in from the north. But mostly they orbited each other like planets held in place by gravity and mutual wariness. The ranch hands watched all of it with the kind of interest men reserve for watching a wagon wheel wobble before it falls off. Rudy kept his opinions to himself, but his sidelong glances said plenty. The younger hands, Billy and Tom, whispered when they thought Wade couldn't hear, making the kinds of jokes men make when they think they're being clever. Wade caught Billy snickering near the barn on the 5th day. Something funny? Wade asked, his voice flat enough to cut glass. Billy's grin vanished. No, sir, just... We were wondering... Wondering what? The kid shifted his weight, suddenly very interested in his boots. Nothing, boss. Nothing at all. Wade stepped closer. Let me make something real clear. Miss Marrow is none of your business. What happens in that house is none of your business. And if I hear you or anyone else running your mouth about her, you'll be looking for work in the next county. We clear? Yes, sir. Crystal. Good. Now get back to work. Billy practically ran toward the feed shed. Tom followed, and Wade stood there feeling his anger cool into something heavier. He couldn't protect Evelyn from town gossip or the sideways looks she'd get at the general store. But he could damn sure make his own property a place where she didn't have to hear it. That evening, he came in to find Evelyn darning socks by lamplight. She glanced up when he entered but didn't speak. Wade hung his coat, washed his hands at the basin, and sat down across from her. The hands won't bother you, he said. Evelyn's needle paused mid-stitch. Did something happen? Just making sure everyone understands the rules. She studied him for a moment, then went back to her mending. You don't have to fight my battles. Wasn't fighting a battle. Was setting expectations. Is there a difference? Yeah, a battle means there's two sides. Expectations mean there's only one side that matters. Mine. Evelyn's mouth twitched. You always this decisive? Only when I'm right. This time she did smile, small and quick like a bird landing. Must be exhausting being right all the time. You have no idea. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. Wade found himself watching her hands again, the efficient movements, the way she'd licked the thread before pushing it through the needle's eye, the small knot she tied when she finished each sock. Where'd you learn to sew like that? He asked. Factory work, shirt waists mostly, before that was dresses. You do the same stitch 10,000 times, you get good at it, or you get fired. She held up the sock, examining her work. Though I'll say, darning's harder than people think. You're trying to rebuild something that's already broken. Easier to throw it out and start fresh. Can't always afford to throw things out. No, Evelyn agreed. I suppose you can't. She set the mended sock aside and picked up another. Wade watched her work for a while longer, then stood and moved to the stove where a pot of coffee sat keeping warm. Want some? He asked. Please? He poured 2 cups and brought one to her. Their fingers brushed when she took it, and Wade felt the calluses on her palm, rough as his own. She took a sip and made a face. This is terrible. I know. How long has this pot been on? Since this morning. Evelyn stared at him. You've been drinking day-old coffee? Tastes fine to me. Your tongue must be made of leather. She stood and walked to the stove, dumping both cups back into the pot. I'm making fresh, and tomorrow I'm showing you how to make it properly so you don't poison yourself. Wade leaned back in his chair, oddly pleased. Didn't know there was a proper way. There are proper ways to do most things. People just get lazy. She started preparing the coffee with brisk, efficient movements. My mother used to say a person who couldn't make decent coffee probably couldn't be trusted with anything else important. Your mother sounds particular. She was, right up until the consumption took her. Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact, no self-pity. I was 14. After that, it was just me and my father, and he wasn't much for conversation or proper anything. He's still alive? Died in a factory accident when I was 23. Lathe pulled him in. She said it the way someone might mention the weather. After that, I was on my own. Worked until I couldn't, then ended up at St. Catherine's. And now I'm here, making coffee in Montana for a man I met a week ago. Life's funny that way. Wade didn't know what to say to that. The casual brutality of her history sat between them like a third person at the table. He'd lost Sarah, and that loss had nearly broken him. But Evelyn had lost everyone, piece by piece, and she was still standing, still mending socks, still correcting his coffee technique. I'm sorry, he said finally. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. For what? For everything you've been through. Don't be. Sorry doesn't change anything. She poured the fresh coffee and brought him a cup. Besides, you've got your own losses. We all do. That's just how life works. It takes and takes until there's nothing left. Or you get smart enough to stop giving it ammunition. Wade sipped the coffee. It was better, significantly better. Is that what you're doing here, stopping it from taking more? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of running. She sat back down with her own cup. What about you? Why'd you really bring me here? I told you. You told me what you thought I needed to hear. I'm asking what's true. Wade met her eyes. They were sharp tonight, cutting through his excuses like a blade through cloth. He could lie, deflect, change the subject. But Evelyn had been honest with him, brutal and plain. She deserved the same. I saw you on that platform, he said slowly, and I saw myself 7 years ago. After Sarah died, people looked at me the same way they looked at you, like I was used up, past my prime, not worth the investment. I worked myself half to death trying to prove them wrong, and all it got me was a big house I hate waking up in. He paused. When I read that letter calling you too old, too unmarketable, it made me furious. Not because I knew you, because I knew what it felt like to be measured and dismissed. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she said, That's the first honest thing you've said to me. Didn't realize I was being dishonest before. Not dishonest? Just careful, there's a difference. She took another sip of coffee. For what it's worth, I don't think you're used up. Stubborn, maybe. Reckless, definitely. But not used up. Stubborn and reckless, that's quite a compliment. Take what you can get. Wade found himself smiling, despite everything. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone quieter, maybe. More grateful. Evelyn laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face. Grateful? For what? The privilege of living in the middle of nowhere with a man who drinks day-old coffee and thinks mending socks is magic? When you put it that way, it's the only way to put it. But she was still smiling. Though I'll admit, it's better than St. Catherine's. The food's worse, but at least I have a room to myself. They talked until the fire burned low and the coffee pot was empty. It was the most Wade had spoken in years, and he found he didn't mind it. Evelyn had a way of pulling words out of him without making it feel like interrogation. She asked about the ranch, the cattle, what winter was like when the snow came up to the windowsills. He asked about Chicago, the factory work, what it was like living in a city where you couldn't see stars at night. When Evelyn finally stood to go to bed, Wade felt the loss of her presence like a cold draft. "Thank you," she said at the doorway. "For what?" "For the honesty and the terrible coffee." She paused. "And for not asking me to be someone I'm not." "Same to you." She nodded and disappeared into her room. Wade sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the dying embers and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. This was supposed to be simple. A business arrangement, a practical solution to a practical problem. But nothing about Evelyn Marrow felt simple. She was sharp edges and hard truths, and being around her made Wade remember what it felt like to be something other than numb. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. The next morning brought the first real test. Wade was out checking the north fence when he heard the wagon. By the time he made it back to the house, Reverend Michaels was already on the porch, talking to Evelyn through the screen door. "Just wanted to welcome you properly," the Reverend was saying. "It's not often we get new residents, and the congregation would love to meet you this Sunday." Wade cleared his throat. Both of them turned. "Reverend," Wade said, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "Wade, good to see you. I was just inviting Miss Marrow to services." "She can make her own decisions about where she spends her Sundays." The Reverend's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course, though I hope you'll both consider it. There's been some talk in town, and I thought it might help if people saw you were respectable people, living respectably." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Wade's jaw tightened. "What people do in town is their business. What happens on my property is mine." "I'm not suggesting anything improper." "Then what are you suggesting?" Reverend Michaels had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Only that appearances matter, Wade, especially for a woman in Miss Marrow's position, unmarried, living alone with a man. Well, you understand how it looks." "I understand perfectly." Wade stepped onto the porch, forcing the Reverend back. "What I don't understand is why you felt the need to ride out here and share your concern." "I'm thinking of Miss Marrow's reputation. Her reputation is fine, and if anyone in town has questions about it, you can tell them to bring those questions to me directly." The Reverend opened his mouth, closed it, then tried a different approach. "The congregation means well, Wade. We only want—" "What you want," Evelyn cut in, her voice clear and sharp, "is to make sure I know my place. I appreciate the invitation, Reverend, but I'll pass. I've heard enough sermons about fallen women to last a lifetime." Reverend Michaels flushed red. "I never said—" "You didn't have to." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Men like you always say the same thing with different words. You're worried about my soul, my reputation, my eternal salvation. But really, you're worried that I'm not properly ashamed. Well, I'm not. I'm here because I chose to be here. If that bothers your congregation, they're welcome to stay in town and mind their own business." The silence that followed was spectacular. Wade had to fight to keep the grin off his face. Reverend Michaels adjusted his collar. "I see. Well, I'll be praying for you both." "You do that," Wade said. "And while you're at it, pray for the people who think they have a right to judge how others live." The Reverend climbed back into his wagon without another word. Wade and Evelyn watched him drive off, dust trailing behind like a punctuation mark. "That was bold," Wade said once the Reverend was out of earshot. "That was necessary." Evelyn turned to go back inside. "Men like that, if you give them an inch, they'll take everything. I learned that a long time ago." Wade followed her into the kitchen. "You made an enemy today." "I made an enemy the day I stepped off that train. At least this way he knows where I stand." She picked up a mixing bowl and started measuring flour. "Besides, you stood up for me. Seemed only fair I returned the favor." "I didn't need you to." "I know. I did it anyway." She looked at him then, and her expression was softer than he'd seen it. "We're in this together now, whether we planned it or not. Might as well act like it." Wade nodded slowly. "Together, yeah. I guess we are." The word felt strange in his mouth. He'd been alone so long that the idea of partnership, real partnership, not just proximity, seemed foreign. But standing there in his kitchen, watching Evelyn knead dough with the same fierce competence she brought to everything, Wade thought maybe he could get used to it. That afternoon, Wade rode into town for supplies. He could feel the stares the moment he hitched his horse outside the general store. Mrs. Pritchard whispered to Mrs. Chen. Tom Farley paused mid-conversation to watch Wade pass. Even old Ben Cooper, who'd known Wade since he was a boy, looked at him with something between pity and disapproval. Wade ignored all of it and walked into the store. Harold Chen was behind the counter, arranging canned goods. He looked up when Wade entered, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Wade, what can I get you?" Wade handed over his list. "Need these by Thursday. Can you deliver?" Harold scanned the list, his lips pursed. "That's quite a lot of flour. And sugar. You planning to feed an army?" "Planning to mind my own business. You should try it." Harold's face darkened. "Now, look here." "No, you look here." Wade leaned on the counter. "I'm going to say this once, and I'm going to say it clear. What happens at my ranch is my concern. Not yours, not the Reverend's, not anyone else's in this town. If you've got a problem with that, we can settle it right now. Otherwise, fill the order and keep your opinions to yourself." Harold stared at him for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "Order will be ready Thursday." "Appreciate it." Wade turned to leave and nearly walked into Margaret Pritchard. The older woman had positioned herself directly in his path, her face pinched with righteous indignation. "Wade Mercer, I need a word with you." "Not interested, Mrs. Pritchard." "That woman you've brought into your home has a name. It's Evelyn Marrow. And like I just told Harold, she's none of your concern." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. "She's the concern of every decent person in this town. Unmarried, living under your roof? It's shameful. What would Sarah think?" The mention of Sarah's name hit Wade like a fist to the gut. He stopped, turned, and when he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "Don't you dare use my wife's name to justify your gossip. Sarah would have welcomed Evelyn with open arms because Sarah actually cared about people, not appearances. You want to talk about shame? Talk about a town that would send a woman back to poverty because she's 38 years old. Talk about an agency that treats human beings like livestock. Talk about a reverend who shows up uninvited to make sure someone knows their place." Wade stepped closer. But don't you ever talk to me about Sarah like you knew her. You didn't know her. You didn't know what she'd want, and you sure as hell don't know me." Mrs. Pritchard's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Wade didn't wait for her response. He walked out of the store, mounted his horse, and rode home with his hands shaking on the reins. By the time he reached the ranch, his anger had cooled into something harder and more permanent. He'd drawn a line today. The whole town would know about it by sunset. There would be consequences, social ones, business ones, maybe worse. But Wade found he didn't care. He'd spent 7 years doing what was expected, being the grieving widower, the respectable rancher, the man who kept his head down and his mouth shut. Where had it gotten him? A big house that felt like a grave and a reputation for being reliable and dead inside. Evelyn was in the garden when he got back, pulling weeds from around the struggling vegetable patch. She looked up when he approached, took one look at his face, and set down her trowel. "What happened?" Wade told her. All of it. Harold's questions, Mrs. Pritchard's sermon, the looks and whispers. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each detail. "I'm sorry," she said when he finished. "I'm causing you trouble." "You're not causing anything. They are." Wade pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. I need you to know what you're in for. This town isn't going to make it easy. They're going to talk. They're going to judge. And they're going to do everything they can to make you feel like you don't belong." "So nothing new then?" Wade looked at her. "Doesn't it bother you?" "Of course it bothers me. But I stopped letting other people's opinions run my life a long time ago." Evelyn stood, brushing dirt off her skirt. "You want to know what I learned in that poorhouse? I learned that people will find a reason to look down on you no matter what you do. Too young, too old, too pretty, too plain, too proud, too meek. There's always something. So you can either spend your whole life trying to be acceptable, or you can decide that the only person you need to be acceptable to is yourself. And that's enough for you?" "It has to be." She met his eyes. "But I'll understand if it's not enough for you. You have a business here, a reputation. If keeping me around is going to ruin that, it won't. You don't know that. I don't care. Wade said it with more force than he meant to. I'm not sending you back because a bunch of small-minded people can't handle seeing a woman make her own choices. If they've got a problem with it, they can take their business elsewhere. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. You're serious? Dead serious. You're also an idiot. That too. This time when she smiled, it reached her eyes. All right, Wade Mercer, if you're determined to tank your reputation for me, the least I can do is make sure you eat well while doing it. They walked back to the house together, and Wade felt something shift between them. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something like solidarity. Two people who'd decided that the world's opinion mattered less than their own choices. That night, Wade lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Evelyn moving around in the kitchen below, probably preparing something for tomorrow's breakfast. The sounds of another person in the house still felt strange, but no longer wrong. He thought about Sarah, something he tried not to do too often. What would she think of all this? Of Evelyn? Of the way Wade had stood in the general store and basically told the whole town to go to hell? Sarah had been kind, gentle. She wouldn't have approved of the confrontation, the anger, the public spectacle. But Sarah had also been fierce in her own way. She'd married Wade against her father's wishes, moved to Montana from St. Louis because she wanted adventure, insisted on learning to shoot and ride despite the neighbors' clutching disapproval. Maybe she would have understood. Maybe she would have liked Evelyn. Or maybe Wade was just trying to justify his own recklessness by imagining his dead wife's blessing. He rolled over, punched his pillow into submission, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring more stares, more whispers, more consequences. But tonight, for the first time in years, Wade Mercer's house felt alive. That had to count for something. The following days established a rhythm. Wade worked the ranch with Rudy in the hands, fixing what broke, branding calves, moving cattle to better grazing. Evelyn worked the house and garden, transforming the bare kitchen into something that actually smelled like food and life. They ate dinner together every night, conversations growing longer and easier. Evelyn told him about Chicago, the noise and crowds, the factories where girls lost fingers to machines, the tenements where 5 families shared 3 rooms. Wade told her about the ranch's early days, when he and Sarah lived in a tent while building the house, when a late freeze killed half their herd and they survived on potatoes and faith. Neither of them talked about the future. It felt safer that way. On the 10th day, Evelyn asked if she could learn to ride. Wade looked up from his breakfast, surprised. You've never been on a horse. City girl, remember? The closest I got to livestock was the rats in the alley. She poured herself more coffee. But if I'm staying here, I should probably know how to handle a horse, in case something happens and you're not around. The practicality of it made sense. The implication, that she was planning to stay, at least for a while, made Wade's chest feel strange. All right, he said. After breakfast, I'll introduce you to Sage. She's old and patient, good horse for learning. An hour later, Wade was in the corral with Evelyn, showing her how to approach a horse without spooking it. Sage, a gray mare with kind eyes and more patience than any creature had a right to, stood placidly while Evelyn tentatively touched her neck. She's so big, Evelyn said. She's actually on the smaller side. Wait until you see Thunder. There's a bigger one? Several. Wade demonstrated how to hold the reins. The key is confidence. Horses can smell fear. If you're nervous, they get nervous. What if I am nervous? Fake it. Horses can't tell the difference. Evelyn shot him a look. That's terrible advice. It's practical advice. Now put your foot in the stirrup. No, the other foot. Left stirrup. It took 3 tries and 1 near disaster where Evelyn almost went over the other side before she managed to get settled in the saddle. She sat there looking simultaneously triumphant and terrified. I'm very high up. You're barely 4 feet off the ground. That's 4 feet I can fall. Wade handed her the reins. You're not going to fall. Just squeeze with your legs and she'll walk, gently. Don't kick her or she'll think you want to run. Evelyn squeezed. Sage took 1 step forward. Evelyn made a noise somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. I'm riding a horse. Barely. Still counts. Wade walked beside her as Sage plodded around the corral. Evelyn's grip on the reins was too tight, and her posture was all wrong, but she was grinning like a kid at Christmas. It transformed her face, knocked years off, made her look like someone who still believed good things could happen. "This is incredible," she said. "I can see everything from up here." "Wait until I take you out on the range. You'll be able to see for miles." The words were out before Wade realized what he'd implied, that there would be a later, a future, trips out onto the range together. Evelyn caught it too. Her grin faded into something more thoughtful. "You'd do that? Take me out there?" "If you want, I do." She looked down at him. "I want to see all of it, the parts you love and the parts you hate. I want to understand why you stayed here after Sarah died, why you built your life in a place that's so hard." Wade stopped walking. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to figure out if I could build a life here too." The honesty of it hit Wade like a hammer. They stared at each other while Sage shuffled her hooves and snorted impatiently. "You're serious," Wade said. "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't. You've been here less than 2 weeks. I've been places for years that never felt like home. Maybe time isn't the thing that matters." Evelyn's hands tightened on the reins. "Or maybe I'm just tired of running from every hard thing. Maybe I want to see if I'm strong enough to stay somewhere difficult and make it work." Wade didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to warn her about the winters that could kill you, the loneliness that ate at your bones, the way this land took and rarely gave back. But another part of him, the part that had brought her here in the first place, wanted to tell her yes. Stay. Build something. See if two broken people could make something whole. "All right," he said finally. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I'll take you out to see the range. Might be a long ride for your first time, but I can handle it." "Yeah," Wade said, looking at her sitting straight-backed on Sage despite her fear and inexperience. "I think you can." That night, another storm rolled in. Wade woke to thunder and rain hammering the roof like fists. He lay there listening to it, remembering the night Sarah died. A storm then too, spring storm, warm and violent. She'd burned with fever, thrashing in sheets soaked with sweat and rain from the leaking roof. Wade had held her hand and begged her to fight, but some fights you can't win no matter how hard you try. He got up, restless. The house was dark except for a sliver of light under Evelyn's door. Wade stood in the hallway, debating. It was late. She might be sleeping despite the light, but something drew him forward, and he knocked softly. "Come in." Evelyn was sitting on her bed, fully dressed, a book open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, unsurprised. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Storms make me restless." "Me too." She closed the book. "Reminds me of the tenements. When it rained, the roof leaked and everything smelled like mildew for weeks. I used to lie awake listening to water drip into pans, counting the drips to stay sane." Wade leaned against the doorframe. "How high did you get?" 3,047. Then I fell asleep and lost count." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Finally, Evelyn said, "Tell me about her, Sarah." Wade stiffened. "Why?" "Because she's part of this house, part of you. And if I'm going to stay, I need to understand what I'm walking into." Wade almost left, almost said it was none of her business, that the past should stay buried. But Evelyn was watching him with those clear eyes, and he found he couldn't lie to her. "She was kind," he said slowly, "almost too kind. Gave away half our food to ranch hands who were down on their luck. Insisted on doctoring every sick calf personally, even when it kept her up all night. She laughed easy and cried easy and felt everything so deeply it sometimes scared me." "You loved her." "I did. Still do in a way. You don't stop loving someone just because they're gone." Wade rubbed his face. "But it's different now. The sharp edges have worn smooth. I can think about her without wanting to put my fist through a wall." "How long did it take to get to that point?" "Too long. Couple years, maybe. I'm not sure I'm even there yet, honestly." Evelyn nodded. "My father used to say grief was like a stone in your pocket. You carry it everywhere, and some days it feels like a boulder, some days like a pebble, but you never really put it down." "Your father sounds like he knew what he was talking about." "He did. About that anyway. About most other things, he was an idiot." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-dark landscape. "Do you think Sarah would have liked me?" The question surprised Wade. "I don't know, maybe. You're different from her in every way that matters." "Is that good or bad?" "It's just true." Wade joined her at the window. "Sarah was sunshine. You're more like I don't know, steel, maybe. Something that doesn't bend easy. Steel can break. So can sunshine. Evelyn looked at him sidelong. That's almost poetic. Didn't know you had it in you. Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to maintain. She laughed, and the sound filled the small room like warmth. Your secret's safe with me. They stood there together watching the storm rage outside, and Wade felt something shift between them again. Not attraction exactly, though there was some of that. More like recognition. Two people who'd been through their own private hells and come out the other side scarred but standing. I should let you sleep, Wade said finally. I'm not tired. Then I should let you read. I'm not interested in reading anymore either. Evelyn turned to face him fully. Stay. Talk to me. Tell me about the ranch, the cattle, what you're planning for next season. Tell me boring things that have nothing to do with death or grief or Chicago poorhouses. So Wade stayed. He sat on the chair by her bed while she settled back against the pillows, and he told her about cattle breeds and grazing patterns and the time a cow gave birth to twins during a blizzard. Evelyn listened like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard, asking questions, making comments that showed she was actually paying attention. Somewhere around dawn, they both fell asleep. Wade in the chair, Evelyn on the bed, the book forgotten on the floor between them. When Wade woke a few hours later with a crick in his neck and morning light streaming through the window, Evelyn was already up and gone. He found her in the kitchen making coffee, and they didn't mention the night before. But something had changed. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed to something more comfortable, more real. And when Evelyn handed him his coffee with a small smile, Wade thought maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. The ride out to the range happened 3 days later, after Evelyn had practiced enough that she could sit a horse without looking like she was waiting to fall off. Wade saddled Sage for her and Thunder for himself, a black gelding with a mean streak Wade had never quite managed to gentle out of him. They left at dawn, the air still cold enough to see their breath. Evelyn wore pants Wade had altered for her, too big in the waist, too short in the leg, but better than trying to ride in a dress. She'd braided her hair tight and pulled on a hat that had belonged to Sarah, though Wade didn't mention that and Evelyn didn't ask. Stay close, Wade said as they headed out. If Sage spooks, don't fight her. Just hold on and let her settle. What spooks a horse? Damn near anything. Snakes, rabbits, shadows that look wrong. Thunder once spooked at his own reflection in a puddle. Evelyn glanced at the black horse. And you ride him anyway? He's fast when it matters, and he hasn't thrown me yet. Yet being the important word. They rode in silence for a while, the ranch house shrinking behind them until it was just a dark spot against the hills. The land opened up ahead, rolling grassland that stretched to mountains Wade could see on clear days, but couldn't reach in a week of hard riding. The sky was huge out here, bigger than seemed possible, and the wind carried the smell of sage and dust. It's beautiful, Evelyn said quietly, in a harsh kind of way. That's the only way it knows how to be. Wade pointed west. That's the boundary of my property. 3,000 acres that direction before you hit the Johnson spread. North runs to the river, south to the rail line, east back to town. You own all of this? Most of it. Some's leased from the territory. Been buying it up piece by piece for 15 years. He didn't add that he'd spent every dollar he had and some he didn't on this land, that it had nearly ruined him twice, that he kept buying because he needed to believe all this space could fill the empty parts inside him. Evelyn seemed to hear it anyway. Does it help, having all this? No, but it keeps me busy. They rode on. Wade showed her the watering holes, the places where the fence needed repair, the gully where they'd found a mountain lion denning last spring. Evelyn asked questions, good questions, practical ones about water rights and grazing rotation and how many head the land could support. She listened like she was studying for a test, filing away information for later use. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses. Wade had brought bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, and they ate sitting on a flat rock while the horses grazed nearby. The sun was high and hot, despite the lingering chill in the air. Tell me the truth, Evelyn said, picking at the bread. Do you regret bringing me here? Wade looked at her, surprised. What makes you think that? You barely sleep. I hear you pacing at night, and you get this look sometimes like you're doing math in your head and the numbers don't add up. That's not about you. Then what's it about? Wade took a drink from his canteen, buying time. Money. The ranch is profitable, but not by much. I've got loans to pay and hands to feed and equipment that breaks faster than I can fix it. Winter's coming, which means buying hay and hoping we don't lose too many calves to the cold. He paused. Bringing you here, keeping you here, that's one more mouth to feed. I'm not saying I regret it, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about making it all work. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. You could have told me. What would that change? I could help. I could find work in town. Bring in money. No. Wade's voice came out harder than he meant. That's not why you're here. Then why am I here, Wade? Really? She turned to face him fully. Because some days I think you brought me out here because you're lonely and didn't know how else to fix it. Other days I think you did it out of guilt or pity or some misguided idea of being noble. And I need to know which it is, because I can't keep guessing. Wade set down his canteen carefully. You want the truth? I've been asking for it since I got here. Fine. I brought you here because I saw you on that platform, and I saw someone who'd been chewed up by a system that didn't care if she lived or died. And I thought, here's a person who understands what it costs to survive. Here's someone who won't expect me to be something I'm not, who won't try to fix me or save me or turn me into a project. He met her eyes. I brought you here because I'm tired of being alone, and you looked like someone who was tired of the same thing. Maybe that's selfish, maybe it's stupid, but it's true. Evelyn's expression didn't change. And now? Now that I'm here and you've had time to think about it. Now I'm glad you stayed, and I'm terrified you'll leave. The words hung between them like something fragile. Evelyn looked away first, staring out at the endless grassland. I'm not leaving, she said finally. Not yet anyway. But I need you to understand something. I'm not staying because I'm grateful or because I owe you. I'm staying because, for the first time in my life, I get to choose where I am. And I'm choosing this. The ranch, the work, the uncertainty, all of it. Why? Because it's mine. Not given to me. Not assigned by some agency or charity. Mine because I decided it was. She looked back at him. That probably doesn't make sense. No, it makes perfect sense. They finished eating in a silence that felt less heavy than before. Wade packed up the food while Evelyn walked over to check on Sage, running a hand down the horse's neck with growing confidence. When they mounted up to head back, something had settled between them. Not resolution exactly, but understanding. The ride home took longer because Wade took a different route, one that followed the river. The water was low this time of year, just a trickle between rocks, but come spring it would swell and rage. Wade had lost 3 calves to that river in the early years before he learned to keep the herd away during runoff season. Sarah used to swim here, Wade said, surprising himself. Summer afternoons, when the heat got bad, she'd strip down to her shift and wade right in. Didn't care who saw. Evelyn smiled. I bet that scandalized the neighbors. We didn't have close neighbors back then. Just Rudy and whoever was working that season. But yeah, they got an eyeful more than once. Did you swim with her? Sometimes. I'm not much for water, prefer solid ground. Wade paused. She tried to teach me once. I made it about 5 feet before I panicked and had to get out. She laughed so hard she nearly drowned herself. Sounds like she had a good sense of humor. She did. She needed it, living with me. Wade glanced at Evelyn. You ever swim? In Lake Michigan a few times when I was young. Water was so cold it hurt. She shifted in the saddle. Haven't thought about swimming in years. Haven't thought about a lot of things until I came here. Like what? Like whether I wanted to keep going or just give up. In Chicago, giving up seemed easier, less painful. Out here, she trailed off, searching for words. Out here it feels like giving up would be wasting something. Like the land wouldn't let me quit even if I wanted to. Wade understood that. The ranch had kept him alive when he had no good reason to keep breathing. Not because it was kind or gentle, but because it demanded too much to allow for the luxury of falling apart completely. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too vivid to be real. Evelyn dismounted with only a little awkwardness, and Wade showed her how to unsaddle Sage and brush her down. They worked side by side in the barn, not talking, just moving through the familiar rhythm of caring for animals. Thank you, Evelyn said as they walked back to the house. For today. For showing me all of it. You're welcome. I mean it, Wade. I know you didn't have to. Stop thanking me. You're starting to sound grateful, and we both know how you feel about that. She laughed, and the sound echoed across the empty yard. Fair point. I'll stop being gracious and go back to being difficult. Good. I prefer difficult. That night they fell into their usual routine, Evelyn cooking while Wade cleaned up from the day's work, then eating together at the kitchen table. But something was different. The air felt less careful, the silences more comfortable. When Evelyn's hand brushed his while reaching for the salt, neither of them pulled away like they were touching something dangerous. After dinner, Wade built up the fire while Evelyn settled into the chair with her mending. It was domestic in a way that should have felt strange, but didn't. Wade found himself watching her work, the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated, the small, satisfied noise she made when a particularly tricky stitch came out right. "You're staring," Evelyn said without looking up. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how this is the quietest my head's been in years." Evelyn did look up then, her needle paused mid-stitch. "Is that good or bad?" "Haven't decided yet." She studied him for a moment, then went back to her sewing. "Let me know when you figure it out." The piece lasted 5 more days. Then Harold Chen showed up with the supply delivery, and everything went sideways. Wade was in the barn when he heard the wagon. He came out expecting the usual driver, but Harold himself was on the bench, reins in hand, expression sour as old milk. "Harold, didn't expect you to make the delivery yourself." "Wanted to talk to you." Harold climbed down, moving like his joints hurt. "About your account." Wade's jaw tightened. "What about it?" "You're 3 months behind. That's not sustainable, Wade. I've got my own bills to pay." "I sent payment last month." "You sent half of what you owe. That's not the same thing." They stood there in the yard, 2 men who'd known each other for 20 years, suddenly on opposite sides of a line neither wanted to acknowledge. "I'll get you the rest," Wade said. "Give me until after I sell the fall calves." "That's 2 months away." "I know when it is." Harold shook his head. "I can't keep extending credit, Wade. Not with the way people are talking." "What way is that?" "You know damn well what way. You bring some woman out here, set her up in your house, and now you're spending money on extra supplies while you can't pay your existing debts. People notice that kind of thing." Wade's hands curled into fists. "My personal life has nothing to do with my credit. Maybe not in the city, but out here, everything's connected. You want me to keep giving you supplies on faith? Stop giving people reasons to question your judgment. Get off my property." Harold blinked. "What?" "You heard me? Take your supplies and get the hell off my land." "Wade, be reasonable. I'm done being reasonable with people who think they get a say in how I live. You want your money? Fine. You'll get every penny I owe you, but I won't get it from you, and I won't stand here listening to you tell me my business while you insult someone under my protection." Wade stepped closer. "Now leave, before I make you leave." Harold's face went red, then white. "You're making a mistake. Won't be my first. Won't be my last." The storekeeper climbed back onto his wagon without unloading anything. Wade stood and watched him drive away, dust rising behind the wheels like smoke signals announcing the end of something. Evelyn appeared at his elbow. Wade hadn't heard her approach. "That sounded bad," she said. "It was bad." "How bad?" Wade told her. About the debt, about Harold cutting him off, about the fact that he now had no supplier and 2 months until he could sell cattle to pay what he owed. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her face grave. "How much do you need?" she asked when he finished. "More than I have." "I have some money, not much, but—" "No." Wade's voice was flat. "Absolutely not." "Wade." "I said no, I'm not taking your money." "Why not? If it helps—" "Because this isn't your problem to solve." He knew he was being irrational, that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. But the thought of taking Evelyn's money she'd probably scraped together doing God knows what kind of work, made him feel like he was proving Harold and Mrs. Pritchard and everyone else right. That he'd brought her here to use her. Evelyn's expression hardened. "So what's your plan? Let the ranch fail because you're too stubborn to accept help? I'll figure something out." "When? After the hands leave because you can't pay them? After the cattle starve because you can't buy feed?" "I said I'll handle it." "How?" Wade didn't have an answer. He stood there with rage and shame boiling in his gut, knowing Evelyn was right and hating that she was right. Fine, Evelyn said, her voice cold. Handle it yourself, but don't blame me when everything falls apart because you were too proud to let someone help you. She walked back to the house, and Wade let her go. He stood in the yard feeling like the biggest fool in Montana, which was saying something given the competition. Rudy emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. That went well. Shut up, Rudy. Just saying, she's trying to help. I know what she's trying to do. Then why? Because if I take her money and the ranch still fails, what does that make me? A man who brought a woman out here and bled her dry along with everything else. Wade kicked at the dirt. I can't do that to her. Rudy was quiet for a moment. You ever think maybe she wants to help because she cares what happens to you, to this place? Then she's an idiot. Yeah, well, takes one to know one. Wade shot him a look, but Rudy had already turned back to the barn. The foreman was right, of course. They were both idiots. Wade for refusing help, Evelyn for offering it. Two broken people trying to survive in a world that didn't care if they made it or not. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Evelyn stayed in the house and Wade stayed outside until darkness forced him in. He found dinner on the stove, stew again, still warm, but Evelyn's door was closed and no light showed underneath. Wade ate alone, the food tasting like ash. When he finished, he stood outside her door for a long time, hand raised to knock, trying to figure out what he'd say if she answered. In the end, he went to his own room and lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak. The next morning, Evelyn was in the kitchen before dawn. She had coffee ready and eggs frying when Wade came down. They ate without speaking, the silence heavy and sharp. I need to go to town, Evelyn said finally. If you won't take my money, fine, but I can at least get supplies. With what? Harold won't sell to you either. There are other stores. Not in this town there aren't, and word's already spread. You think anyone's going to sell to someone living under my roof? Wade pushed his plate away. You'll just embarrass yourself. Evelyn's eyes flashed. I've been embarrassed before. I'll survive. This is different. How? Because these people will rip you apart. They'll smile while doing it, but they'll rip you apart all the same. So what am I supposed to do? Sit here and watch everything collapse? Watch you drive yourself into the ground because you're too stubborn to accept reality? She stood up, chair scraping against the floor. I'm not helpless, Wade. I'm not some delicate thing that needs protecting from harsh words. I've survived a lot worse than small-town gossip. I know that. Then let me help. I can't. Why not? Because... Wade stopped, the truth stuck in his throat. Because if she helped, and it wasn't enough, he'd have nothing left. No pride, no self-respect, no illusion that he was anything other than a failure who dragged someone else down with him. Because taking her help meant admitting he needed her, and needing people had a way of ending badly. Evelyn waited, but when Wade didn't continue, she shook her head. Fine, do it your way. But when this place falls apart, don't pretend you didn't have a choice. She left without another word, and Wade sat in the kitchen surrounded by the wreckage of breakfast, feeling the walls close in. The hands noticed the tension, of course. Men who worked together developed a sense for these things, and Billy and Tom exchanged looks that Wade pretended not to see. Even Rudy, normally unflappable, seemed uneasy. On the third day of silence, Rudy cornered Wade in the tack room. You need to fix this, the foreman said without preamble. Mind your business. This is my business. You're distracted. She's miserable and the whole ranch can feel it. Whatever happened, apologize and move on. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're making it complicated because that's what you do. Rudy crossed his arms. I've known you 15 years, Wade. You're the most stubborn son of a bitch I've ever met, and that includes a mule I had once that would rather starve than eat hay it didn't like. But this is just stupid. She doesn't understand. She understands perfectly. You're the one who doesn't get it. Rudy leaned against the wall. That woman isn't trying to take over your ranch or steal your money or whatever nonsense you've convinced yourself of. She's trying to be a partner, and you're so busy protecting yourself that you can't see she's actually on your side. Wade wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. Because Rudy was right. Evelyn had been nothing but honest with him from the start. She'd told him why she stayed, what she wanted, how she felt, and Wade had responded by shoving her away the first time things got difficult. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted quietly. Start by talking to her. Actually talking, not just grunting and hoping she reads your mind. Rudy pushed off the wall. And maybe consider that accepting help isn't the same as admitting defeat. Sometimes it's just being smart enough to know you can't do everything alone. He left Wade standing there with a half-mended bridle and too many thoughts competing for space in his head. That night, Wade knocked on Evelyn's door. She opened it after a long pause, her expression guarded. Can we talk? Wade asked. Depends. Are you going to actually talk or just tell me what I can't do? I deserve that. Evelyn stepped aside to let him in. Her room was sparse. She hadn't added much to it in the weeks she'd been here. Just a few books on the small table, a brush on the dresser, the clothes Wade had given her hanging from pegs on the wall. It made his chest hurt, seeing how little she'd allowed herself to settle in. I'm sorry, Wade said, for being an ass, for pushing you away when you were trying to help. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed. Why did you? Because I'm scared. The admission cost him, but he forced it out. I'm scared that if I take your help and we still fail, you'll realize you made a mistake coming here. And I'm scared that if we succeed, it'll be because of you, not me, and that'll mean I was never enough on my own. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Wade laughed despite himself. Yeah, probably. Definitely. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. Wade, I didn't come here to save you or your ranch. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, and you gave me a choice when no one else would. Everything after that, the cooking, the cleaning, offering money, that's not about you. It's about me building something for myself, a place where I matter. You matter. Then let me prove it. Let me help, not because you need rescuing, but because that's what people do when they care about something. They invest in it. They fight for it. She met his eyes. I'm fighting for this, Wade. For the ranch, for a future that doesn't involve going back to Chicago or ending up in another poorhouse. I need you to let me fight. Wade sat down in the chair across from her, the same chair he'd slept in during the storm. I don't know how to do this. Partnership, sharing responsibility. Sarah and I never really had to. We were young and stupid and things just worked out until they didn't. Well, we're not young and we're definitely not stupid. So maybe we do it differently. Evelyn leaned forward. Talk to me about the money. Really talk. How bad is it? So Wade told her everything. The full extent of his debts, the loans he'd taken to buy land and equipment, the years of slim margins and bad winters. He laid it all out like cards on a table, holding nothing back. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. When he finished, Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I have $43 saved. It's not much, but it's something, Wade interrupted, and I'm grateful for it, truly. He paused. There's also the fall sale. If we can hold on until then, we should clear enough to catch up with Harold and the other creditors. What do we need to hold on until then? Feed for the cattle, supplies for the house, wages for the hands. Wade did the math in his head. Your $43 and what I have left gets us maybe halfway there. Then we need to make up the other half somehow. Evelyn stood and started pacing, her mind clearly working. What about selling something, equipment you're not using, land you don't need? Already sold everything that wasn't essential, and I can't sell land, it's mortgaged. Then we need to bring in money another way. She stopped pacing. What if I took in laundry or mending? There's got to be people in town who'd pay for that. After the way they've treated you? I don't care how they've treated me. Money doesn't have feelings. She looked at him. Unless you've got a better idea? Wade didn't. And sitting there watching Evelyn plan and scheme and refuse to give up, he felt something break open in his chest. This woman who'd been thrown away like trash was fighting for his ranch like it was hers. Maybe because it was starting to be hers. Maybe because she saw in it what he'd seen, a chance to build something that mattered. All right, he said, we'll try it your way. But if anyone in town gives you trouble, I'll handle it. I've been handling trouble my whole life. I know, but you don't have to handle it alone anymore. Evelyn smiled, and it was like sun breaking through storm clouds. No, I guess I don't. They talked late into the night, making plans and contingencies. By the time Wade left her room, the sky was starting to lighten in the east. He felt exhausted and hopeful and terrified all at once. The next morning, Evelyn rode into town alone. Wade watched Evelyn ride away on Sage, her back straight and her jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. Every instinct told him to saddle Thunder and follow her, to stand between her and whatever the town would throw at her. But she'd made it clear she needed to do this herself, and Wade was trying, really trying, to trust that she could. Rudy came to stand beside him. She'll be fine. You don't know that. No, but I know she's tougher than half the men I've worked with, and that's saying something. The foreman squinted at the horizon. Besides, what's the worst that can happen? They say no? She's heard that before. Wade knew he was right, but it didn't make the waiting any easier. He threw himself into work, fixing fence posts that didn't really need fixing, reorganizing the tack room for the third time that month. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Evelyn didn't return until late afternoon. Wade saw the wagon from a distance and his stomach dropped. She'd taken the wagon, which meant she'd expected to bring things back. The fact that it looked just as empty as when she'd left wasn't a good sign. He met her in the yard as she was climbing down. Her face was carefully blank, giving nothing away. "How'd it go?" Wade asked. "Wade, about as well as you'd expect." Evelyn handed him the reins. Mrs. Pritchard slammed her door in my face before I could finish asking. The bakery owner said she already has help. 3 other houses said no before I even mentioned money. Wade's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not finished yet." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket. "The seamstress on 4th Street, Mrs. Chen, Harold's wife. She needs help with a rush order. 20 shirts for the railway workers, due in 3 weeks. She'll pay $2 per shirt if I can match her quality." Wade did the math. "That's $40. $40 we didn't have this morning." Evelyn's expression was triumphant, despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "I showed her some of my work. That shirt I mended for you last week." She was impressed. Said if this batch goes well, there might be more work. "Mrs. Chen hired you?" Even though her husband runs the general store. She runs the sewing business, and apparently she's got her own opinions about how he handled things. Evelyn smiled grimly. "She didn't come right out and say it, but I got the impression she wasn't happy about him cutting you off." Wade felt something loosen in his chest. $40. That plus what we have gets us through to the cattle sale, barely, but it's possible. Evelyn started walking toward the house. "I start tomorrow. She's got a sewing machine I can use in her shop, but I told her I'd work faster at home if we could borrow it. We can pick it up tonight if you want." "Tomorrow's fine. I'm exhausted." She paused at the door. "Wade, thank you for letting me try. Thank you for not giving up when half the town turned you away." "Only half? That's better than I expected." That night they celebrated with whiskey Wade had been saving for an occasion that never seemed to come. It was cheap stuff that burned going down, but Evelyn didn't complain. They sat on the porch watching the sunset, passing the bottle back and forth like old friends. "Tell me something," Evelyn said after her second pull from the bottle. "Why cattle? Why this specific kind of misery?" Wade laughed. "You think there's a better kind?" "I think there's easier ways to make a living. You could have been a store clerk, a banker, anything that didn't involve freezing your ass off 6 months a year. Tried working in a store once, lasted 3 days before I punched a customer." Wade took the bottle back. "I'm not good with people. Never have been, but animals, land, that makes sense to me. You put in the work, you get results. Not always the results you want, but at least there's logic to it. There's no logic to a late freeze killing your herd." "No, but at least it's not personal. Nature doesn't care enough to be cruel on purpose." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "People do, though." "Yeah, people do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to black. Stars came out one by one, more stars than Evelyn had ever seen in Chicago. She kept staring up at them like she was trying to count them all. "You know what I miss most about the city?" she said finally. "Not the crowds, or the noise, or even the convenience. I miss the anonymity. You could be anyone there. No one cared about your history or your mistakes. You were just another face in the crowd." That doesn't sound like missing it. It sounds like running from it. Maybe. Or maybe it's both. Evelyn took another drink. "Out here, everyone knows everything about everyone. It's suffocating. That's because you're letting it matter. What they think, what they say, none of it changes who you are." "Doesn't it, though?" Isn't that the whole point of reputation? Other people deciding who you get to be? Wade shook his head. Only if you let them. I stopped caring what this town thought of me years ago. Made life a lot simpler. Lonely, though? Yeah, but sometimes lonely is better than being surrounded by people who want you to be someone you're not. Evelyn turned to look at him. Is that what Sarah wanted? For you to be someone different? No. Sarah loved me exactly as I was. That was part of the problem. How is that a problem? Wade struggled to find the words. She saw the best in everyone, including me. And I spent so much time trying to live up to that vision that I forgot who I actually was underneath. When she died, I didn't know how to be myself anymore. Took me years to figure it out. And did you? Figure it out? Still working on it. Wade handed her the bottle. What about you? You ever been married? In love? Once. Long time ago. Factory foreman named Thomas. Evelyn's expression went distant. He was kind, funny, made me feel like maybe life didn't have to be so hard all the time. Asked me to marry him after 6 months. What happened? He died. Cholera outbreak. Half the factory got sick, and Thomas was one of the ones who didn't make it. She took a long drink. After that, I decided love wasn't worth the risk. Easier to be alone than to survive losing someone again. But you're here. With me. This is different. How? Evelyn met his eyes, and in the darkness, Wade could barely make out her expression. Because we're both too damaged to expect anything perfect. We know what it costs, and maybe that makes it safer somehow. Wade wasn't sure if that was true, but he wanted it to be. He wanted to believe that two broken people could build something sturdy out of their respective wreckage. That shared scars could be a foundation instead of a warning. The next morning, Evelyn started work on the shirts. Wade rode into town with her to pick up the sewing machine for Mrs. Chen, who met them at the back door of her shop like she was conducting a drug deal. 20 shirts? 3 weeks? Mrs. Chen said, handing over a bundle of fabric. You bring them back on time. Quality work. I'll have more for you. You'll have them, Evelyn promised. Mrs. Chen glanced at Wade, then back to Evelyn. My husband's a fool, cutting off good customers over gossip. I told him so. Appreciate you saying that. I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it because it's true. Mrs. Chen helped them load the sewing machine into the wagon. But for what it's worth, I think what you're doing, making your own way, not waiting for permission, that takes guts. This town could use more women with guts. Evelyn smiled. Thank you. They drove back to the ranch in silence. Wade could tell Evelyn was pleased, trying not to show it, but failing. When they got the machine set up in the kitchen, she ran her hands over it like it was made of gold. I haven't used a machine this nice since the factory, she said. Mrs. Chen takes care of her equipment. Can you really make 40 shirts in 3 weeks? If I work 12 hours a day? Yes. It won't be fun, but I can do it. She threaded the needle with practiced ease. You'll have to handle dinner for a while. I'll be too busy to cook. I can manage. Can you? Or will you just eat cold beans straight from the can? I resent that. I ate them warm last time. Evelyn laughed, and Wade left her to her work. He spent the rest of the day feeling oddly light, like something heavy had been lifted off his shoulders. They had a plan. It was a terrible plan that relied on Evelyn working herself to exhaustion and the cattle sale going well and nothing else going wrong between now and then. But it was a plan, and that was more than he'd had a week ago. The days fell into a new rhythm. Wade woke early to do his ranch work, came in for a quick lunch, then took over the household tasks while Evelyn sewed. The mechanical whir of the sewing machine became the soundtrack to their lives, a constant reminder that they were fighting for something together. Evelyn worked like she was possessed, fingers flying over fabric with the kind of precision that only came from years of practice. Wade would bring her coffee, and she'd barely look up. He'd bring her dinner, and she'd eat while still sewing, crumbs falling into the folds of cloth. You need to rest, Wade said on the 5th day, watching her squint at a seam in the lamplight. I'm fine. You're exhausted, I can see it. I've been more exhausted. She didn't slow down. In the factory, we did 14-hour shifts in summer. No breaks except to use the privy. This is nothing. Just because you've had it worse doesn't mean you can't take care of yourself now. Evelyn finally stopped and looked at him. I'll rest when the shirts are done. Until then, I work. Wade recognized the stubbornness in her voice. It was the same stubbornness he heard in his own when people told him to slow down, take it easy, stop driving himself into the ground. He couldn't criticize her for doing exactly what he'd been doing for years. At least let me help, he said. I can cut fabric or pin seams or whatever you need. You know how to sew? Sarah tried to teach me once. I was terrible at it. Then you'd just slow me down. But Evelyn's expression softened. Though you could read to me while I work, keeps my mind from wandering. So Wade started reading to her in the evenings. He'd pick up whatever book Evelyn had sitting on her nightstand, cheap novels about adventure and romance, the kind sold in train stations for a nickel. Wade wasn't much for reading, but he found he didn't mind it when Evelyn was listening. She'd make small comments between stitches, agreeing or disagreeing with the characters' choices, predicting what would happen next. It was during one of these reading sessions that Billy came running up to the house, breathless and wild-eyed. Boss, you gotta come quick. The north fence is down and cattle are getting through. Wade was on his feet before Billy finished talking. How many head? Don't know yet. Rudy sent me to get you. Wade grabbed his coat and hat. Tell Rudy I'm coming, and get Tom. We'll need all hands. He was halfway out the door when Evelyn called after him. Be careful. Always am. That's a lie and we both know it. Wade grinned despite the urgency. Fine. I'll try not to get killed. Much better. The fence situation was worse than Billy had implied. A whole section had come down, not weather damage or wear, but deliberate. Someone had cut the wire and pulled down the posts. 20 head of cattle had already wandered through, and more were investigating the gap. Rudy was already rounding up the strays when Wade arrived. This wasn't an accident. I can see that. Wade examined the cut wire, rage building in his gut. Who'd do this? Someone who wants to cause you trouble. Got a long list to pick from. They spent the next 4 hours rounding up cattle and rebuilding the fence. It was hard, miserable work made worse by the knowledge that someone had done this on purpose. By the time they finished, it was full dark and Wade's hands were bleeding from wire cuts. You think they'll come back? Tom asked as they secured the last post. Probably, but we'll be ready next time. Wade wiped blood off his hands. I want someone riding the fence line twice a day from now on. Morning and evening. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you come get me immediately. The hands nodded and dispersed to their bunks. Wade rode back to the house feeling like he'd aged 10 years in one day. He found Evelyn still at the sewing machine, working by lamplight. You're back, she said without looking up. I was starting to worry. Someone cut the fence, let cattle out. Wade collapsed into a chair. Took hours to get them all back. Evelyn's hands stilled. Who would do that? Someone who thinks I need to be taught a lesson. Could be Harold, could be some ranch hand I fired years ago, could be a dozen different people. Wade leaned his head back. This town's got a long memory for grudges. Are the cattle all right? Yeah, no one's hurt except my pride and my hands. Evelyn set down her sewing and came over to examine his hands. The cuts weren't deep, but they were numerous, crisscrossing his palms in red lines. She disappeared into her room and came back with a small tin of salve. This'll help, she said, opening the tin. The salve smelled sharp and medicinal. Where'd you get that? Made it myself. Mrs. Chen gave me some herbs from her garden. Evelyn took his hand and started applying the salve with gentle fingers. You should be more careful. Wasn't exactly planning on someone sabotaging my fence. I meant in general, you work yourself like you're trying to prove something. Maybe I am. To who? Wade didn't have a good answer for that. To himself? To Sarah's memory? To everyone who'd ever doubted he could make this ranch work? All of the above? Evelyn finished with one hand and started on the other. Her touch was efficient but not unkind, and Wade found himself watching her face instead of his hands. She looked tired, deep circles under her eyes, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. You're working too hard, he said. Look who's talking. I'm serious, Evelyn. You're going to make yourself sick. I've got 12 shirts done and 8 to go. I'm right on schedule. She closed the tin of salve. Besides, this is nothing compared to factory work. At least here, I'm working for myself. For us, Wade corrected. You're working for us. Evelyn met his eyes, and something passed between them that Wade couldn't quite name. Not love, too soon for that, too complicated. But something like partnership, like two people discovering they were stronger together than apart. Yeah, Evelyn said softly. For us. The fence incident wasn't the last problem. 3 days later, the well pump broke. 2 days after that, one of the horses came up lame. Then a storm blew through and tore shingles off the barn roof. It was like the universe had decided to test exactly how much Wade and Evelyn could handle before breaking. They handled all of it. Wade fixed the pump with parts salvaged from an old piece of equipment. Evelyn helped him tend to the lame horse, mixing poultices and wrapping the leg with strips of cloth she couldn't use for shirts. Together they patched the barn roof, Wade on the ladder while Evelyn held it steady, and handed up nails. Through all of it, Evelyn kept sewing. The pile of finished shirts grew slowly but steadily. Wade would come in from whatever disaster had struck that day to find her bent over the machine, fingers moving in that hypnotic rhythm, completely focused on the work in front of her. On the 18th day, Evelyn finished the last shirt. She held it up to the lamplight, checking for flaws, then set it on top of the stack with a satisfied sigh. Done, she announced. 20 shirts, all finished, 3 days early. Wade looked up from the ledger he'd been studying. All of them? Every single one. Want to help me check them? They spent the next hour going through each shirt, looking for loose threads or crooked seams. The quality was impeccable, better than anything Mrs. Chen probably expected. Wade felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with watching Evelyn prove what she was capable of. These are perfect, he said. Mrs. Chen's going to be thrilled. Let's hope so, because we need that money. Evelyn stretched, her back popping. When should we take them to her? Tomorrow morning. I'll drive you. You don't have to. I want to. Wade closed the ledger. Besides, I need to see Harold anyway. Time to start settling up. The next morning, they loaded the shirts carefully into crates and drove into town. Wade felt the usual stares as they passed, but they bothered him less than before. Let people look. Let them whisper. He and Evelyn were doing what needed to be done, and the rest was just noise. Mrs. Chen met them at her shop, and her eyes widened when she saw the shirts. She examined each one carefully, checking seams and buttonholes with the critical eye of someone who knew quality work. These are excellent, she said finally. Better than I expected, honestly. Does that mean there's more work? Evelyn asked. It means there's a lot more work. Mrs. Chen pulled out a ledger. I've got orders backed up for months. If you can keep producing at this quality, I'll keep you busy. Wade watched Evelyn's face light up, and he felt something warm settle in his chest. This woman who'd been thrown away by an agency, rejected by a town, dismissed as too old and unmarketable, she was proving all of them wrong. One shirt at a time. Mrs. Chen counted out $40 in cash and handed it to Evelyn. First installment on the next batch is due in 3 weeks. 30 shirts this time, if you can manage it. I can manage it. Good. Mrs. Chen glanced at Wade. You've got a hard worker here. Don't let her get away. Wasn't planning on it. They left the shop and Wade headed straight for Harold's store. The older man was behind the counter, and his expression went sour when he saw them. Come to grovel? Harold asked. Wade counted out money onto the counter. Come to pay what I owe. That's half. I'll have the rest after the cattle sale. Harold stared at the money like it might bite him. Where'd you get this? None of your business. Do you want it or not? The storekeeper's jaw worked for a moment. Then he swept the money into his cash box. Fine, but I want the rest by end of October, or I'm taking it to the territorial court. You'll have it. Wade turned to leave, but Harold's voice stopped him. You know people are talking, right? About her working for my wife? About the two of you living together unmarried. It's not proper. Wade turned back slowly. And here I thought we'd already had this conversation. Apparently you need a reminder. What happens between me and Miss Marrow is our business. Not yours, not this town's, not anyone's, but ours. You want to gossip? That's your choice. But don't expect me to care. You should care. Reputation matters out here. Does it? Because the way I see it, reputation is just another word for fear. Fear of what people think. Fear of stepping outside the line someone else drew. I'm done being afraid of that. Wade leaned on the counter. Now, is there anything else you'd like to say about my personal life, or can I get back to work? Harold's face went red, but he didn't respond. Wade nodded and walked out, Evelyn following behind him. Once they were outside, she let out a breath. That was intense. Had to be said. You really don't care what they think, do you? Not anymore. Took me long enough to get here, but no, I don't. Wade helped her into the wagon. What about you? Does it bother you? Honestly, I thought it would. But standing in there watching you defend us, it felt good. Like maybe I don't have to keep apologizing for existing. You never did, but I'm glad you're realizing it. They drove back to the ranch in companionable silence. The $40 sat between them on the bench seat, more than just money. It was proof that they could do this, that they could survive not by permission or charity, but through their own effort and stubbornness. That evening, Wade found Evelyn in the garden pulling weeds. The vegetables were starting to come in, potatoes and carrots, and a few scraggly tomatoes. She'd coaxed life out of soil that Wade had given up on years ago. Need help? He asked. Always. She handed him a trowel. How are we looking? Money-wise? With what you made and what I had saved, we can make it to the cattle sale. Barely, if nothing else goes wrong. Something always goes wrong. Yeah, but maybe we're due for some good luck. Evelyn snorted. I'll believe that when I see it. They worked until the sun set, pulling weeds and talking about nothing important. It felt normal in a way that Wade's life hadn't felt in years. Not perfect. Nothing about their situation was perfect, but real. Solid. Like something worth fighting for. Later that night, Wade couldn't sleep. He got up and wandered to the kitchen, thinking about coffee, and found Evelyn already there. She was sitting at the table in her nightgown, staring at nothing. Couldn't sleep either? Wade asked. Too much on my mind. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Keep me company. Wade sat. They didn't talk, just existed in the same space, comfortable with silence. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance. Inside, the house creaked and settled like it was breathing. Thank you, Evelyn said finally. For what? For defending me. In the store, on the platform that first day, every time someone tries to make me feel small. You don't have to do that. Yeah, I do, because you matter, and anyone who can't see that is an idiot. Evelyn smiled. You know, when I first got on that train to come out here, I thought I was going to die. Not literally, but inside. I thought I'd end up in some man's house being grateful for scraps and waiting to be discarded again. She looked at him. I'm glad I was wrong. Me too. They sat there as the night deepened around them, two people who'd found each other by accident and decided to stay on purpose. It wasn't the fairy tale that Sarah and Wade had started with. It was messier, harder, built on shared scars instead of shared dreams. But as Wade looked at Evelyn in the lamplight, tired, stubborn, real, he thought maybe this was better. Maybe stories built on truth instead of fantasy had a better chance of surviving the ending. The weeks leading up to the cattle sale felt like holding your breath underwater. Every morning, Wade woke up expecting some new disaster. Another fence cut, a sick cow, weather that would ruin everything. But the disasters didn't come. The ranch held together through sheer stubbornness and Evelyn's 30 shirts, which Mrs. Chen paid for with the same quiet approval she'd shown the first batch. By the time October arrived, they had just enough money to scrape by until the sale. Wade had 93 head ready to sell, calves mostly, fattened up and healthy despite everything. If the price held at what he'd been quoted, they'd clear enough to pay Harold in full, settle the other debts, and have a small cushion for winter. If the price held. You're doing it again, Evelyn said from across the breakfast table. Wade looked up. Doing what? That thing where you calculate disaster in your head. I can see it on your face. Just running numbers. You've been running the same numbers for 3 days. They haven't changed. She poured herself more coffee. The sale's tomorrow. Either it works out or it doesn't. Worrying won't change it. Spoken like someone who's never had everything riding on one day. I had everything riding on getting on a train to Montana. Worked out all right. Wade couldn't argue with that. He finished his breakfast and went out to check on the cattle one last time. They looked good. Better than good, actually. Rudy had done excellent work getting them ready, and even Tom and Billy had stepped up, putting in extra hours without being asked. The foreman found Wade by the holding pen, clipboard in hand. Final count is 93. No injuries, no sickness. They're ready. Good. We'll start the drive at dawn. You nervous? Wade considered lying, then decided against it. Terrified. Yeah, me too. Rudy squinted at the cattle. But we've done everything we can. Rest is just luck. Never been lucky. Then I guess it's time you started. That night, Wade couldn't sleep despite the early morning ahead. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Around midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway and then a soft knock on his door. You awake? Evelyn's voice quiet. Yeah. She opened the door. She was in her nightgown with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the cold. Can't stop thinking about tomorrow. Me neither. Evelyn hesitated in the doorway. Can I come in? Not for... I just don't want to be alone right now. Wade scooted over and she climbed into bed beside him, keeping a careful distance but close enough that he could feel her warmth. They lay there in the darkness, not touching, just breathing the same air. What happens if the sale goes badly? Evelyn asked. We figure something else out. And if there's nothing else to figure out? Wade was quiet for a long time. Then I guess we lose the ranch. I sell what I can, pay what I owe, and start over somewhere else. We, Evelyn said. You said I. Don't I get a say in this? You'd stay, even if everything fell apart. Where else would I go? Back to Chicago? Back to waiting for permission to exist? She turned to look at him. I meant what I said before. I'm not leaving. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Wade felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked tight since Sarah died. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way he'd loved Sarah. But it was trust. The bone-deep certainty that Evelyn would still be there when things got hard, because she'd already proven it a dozen times over. Evelyn, he started, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. I know, she said quietly. Me too. She fell asleep before Wade did, her breathing evening out into a gentle rhythm. Wade lay awake watching her, this woman who'd been thrown away like garbage and had somehow become essential to his survival. When he finally slept, it was the best rest he'd had in months. The cattle drive started at dawn with all hands working. Wade rode point with Rudy while Tom and Billy brought up the rear, keeping the herd moving toward the rail yard where the buyers would be waiting. Evelyn watched from the porch, and Wade could feel her eyes on him until the herd crested the first hill and the ranch disappeared from view. The drive took 6 hours. The cattle were cooperative, the weather held, and they arrived at the rail yard with time to spare before the auction started. Wade's stomach was in knots as he dismounted and headed toward the buyer's tent. 3 buyers had shown up, which was good. Competition meant better prices. Wade recognized 2 of them from previous years, stocky men with calculators in their hands and skepticism in their eyes. The third was new, younger, dressed too well for someone who spent their days around livestock. The auction worked backwards from how Wade thought it should. Instead of the cattle being presented to buyers, the buyers walked through the holding pens making offers. Wade stood by while they examined his herd, poking at calves, checking teeth, discussing weight estimates in low voices. The first buyer offered $18 a head. Wade countered at $22. The buyer laughed and walked away. The second buyer offered $19. Wade held firm at $22, knowing he was pushing his luck but unable to back down. The buyer shook his head and moved on to the next herd. That left the young buyer, who'd been quiet through both negotiations. He walked through Wade's cattle again, taking his time, then came back with an unreadable expression. $21 per head, he said. Final offer. Wade did the math in his head. 21 times 93 was just under $2,000. Enough to pay Harold, enough to settle the other debts, enough to get through winter if they were careful. Not enough for a cushion, but enough to survive. 22 and you've got a deal, Wade said, gambling everything on one more push. The buyer studied him for a long moment. You're Wade Mercer, right? The one who had that trouble with Harold Chen? Wade's jaw tightened. What's that got to do with cattle prices? Nothing, but Harold's a friend of mine, and he mentioned you were having financial difficulties. The buyer's expression didn't change. 21 per head. Take it or leave it. Wade understood what was happening. This was Harold's revenge, subtle and effective. The buyer wasn't going to budge not because the cattle weren't worth 22, but because someone had poisoned the well. Wade could refuse, could hope one of the other buyers came back, but they both knew they wouldn't. 21, Wade said, the words tasting like ash. They shook on it, and the buyer arranged for payment. Wade watched his cattle get loaded onto rail cars, watched months of work disappear into someone else's profit, and felt the familiar weight of defeat settling on his shoulders. Rudy appeared at his elbow. "How'd we do?" "Not as good as I hoped, but good enough." They rode back to the ranch in silence. The money was secure in Wade's saddlebag, a thick envelope that should have felt like victory but instead felt like barely escaping disaster. He'd survive, the ranch would survive, but just barely, and everyone involved knew it. Evelyn was waiting on the porch when they arrived. She took one look at Wade's face and her expression fell. "That bad?" "Could be worse. Got 21 per head." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's enough." "Barely." Wade climbed down from Thunder, every muscle aching. "I'll head to town tomorrow, pay Harold, settle up the rest. And then? And then we figure out how to survive winter on what's left." Evelyn followed him inside while Rudy took the horses to the barn. Wade sat down heavily at the kitchen table and pulled out the envelope, counting money with mechanical precision. One pile for Harold, one for the feed supplier, one for equipment debts, one for the hands' wages. What remained was smaller than Wade wanted to look at. "How much?" Evelyn asked. "Enough for basics. Food, minimal repairs, if we're careful." "That's not much of a cushion." "No, but it's what we have." Wade rubbed his face. "I'm sorry. I know you were hoping for more." "I wasn't hoping for anything except making it through. And we did." She sat down across from him. "Wade, this isn't a failure. You kept the ranch running, paid your debts, and we've still got a roof over our heads. That's more than a lot of people can say. Doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But maybe enough is all we get, and we have to decide if that's worth fighting for." Wade looked at her across the table, this woman who'd survived poorhouses and rejection and a town full of people who wanted her to fail. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't even slowing down. And if she could keep fighting with everything stacked against her, maybe he could too. "You're right," he said. "It's worth fighting for." "Damn right it is. Now, I've got dinner going. You're going to eat, get some rest, and tomorrow we'll deal with Harold and whoever else needs dealing with." Wade did as he was told, too tired to argue. That night he slept hard and dreamless, Evelyn's words echoing in his head. Enough is all we get. Maybe that was true. Maybe spending your whole life chasing more than enough was just another way of running from what you already had. The next morning, Wade rode into town alone. He went to Harold's store first, counting out the money owed with careful precision. Harold took it without comment, marking the ledger paid in full with what looked like disappointment. "Surprised you made it," Harold said. "That makes two of us." "What now? You going to limp through winter and start this whole thing over again next year?" Wade met his eyes. "That's exactly what I'm going to do. And the year after that, and the year after that. Until I can't anymore. Because that's what you do when you care about something. You keep fighting for it, even when people like you hope you'll fail." Harold's face darkened. "I never—" "Yes, you did. You and half this town. You wanted me to fail because I refused to follow your rules about how I should live. Well, I'm still here. The ranch is still here. And Evelyn's still here. So whatever you were hoping for, you didn't get it." Wade turned and walked out before Harold could respond. He made his rounds to the other creditors, paying each one in full, watching their surprise that he'd actually come through. By the time he finished, it was late afternoon and his saddlebag was significantly lighter. He was heading back to his horse when he ran into Reverend Michaels outside the bakery. "Wade," the Reverend said, his tone carefully neutral. "Heard you had a successful sale." "Successful enough." "Good, good. I'm glad to hear it." The Reverend paused. "You know, I've been thinking about what Miss Marrow said that day, about fallen women and judgment." "Have you?" "I was wrong to come to your ranch uninvited, wrong to presume I knew what was best for either of you." The Reverend looked uncomfortable, like the words were costing him. "I let the congregation's concern cloud my judgment. I'm sorry for that." Wade wasn't sure he'd heard right. "You're apologizing." "I am. Whatever's happening between you and Miss Marrow, it's clear you care for each other. And I've seen enough loveless marriages blessed by the church to know that love matters more than propriety." "We're not—" Wade stopped. Were they? He and Evelyn hadn't talked about love, hadn't defined what they were to each other. But standing there trying to deny it felt wrong. "It's complicated," Most worthwhile things are. The Reverend extended his hand. For what it's worth, you have my blessing. Not that you need it. Wade shook his hand, too surprised to do anything else. Thank you. He rode home in a daze, the Reverend's words rattling around in his head. Love. Was that what this was? This partnership, this mutual survival, this feeling of being less alone than he'd been in years? He found Evelyn in the garden, harvesting the last of the tomatoes before the first frost hit. She looked up when he approached, dirt on her hands and a question in her eyes. How'd it go? Paid everyone. We're clear. That's good. She set down her basket. What's wrong? You look strange. Ran into Reverend Michaels. He apologized. For what? For judging us. Said we had his blessing. Wade dismounted, suddenly needing to be closer to her. Evelyn, what are we doing here? What do you mean? I mean, what is this between us? Is it just convenience, survival, or is it... He struggled for the right words. The Reverend called it love. Is that what we're doing? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her hands still covered in dirt, her expression unreadable. Then she said, I don't know. I've been in love before, and this doesn't feel like that. It's harder, messier, less about butterflies and more about... She trailed off. More about what? More about choosing someone every day, even when it would be easier not to. More about building something together instead of just feeling good in the moment. She met his eyes. Is that love? Maybe. Or maybe it's something better, something that actually lasts. Wade stepped closer. And you're choosing this? Choosing me? Every day, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. Evelyn reached up and touched his face, leaving a smudge of dirt on his cheek. Are you choosing me? Yeah, I am. They stood there in the garden while the sun set behind the mountains, two people who'd been broken by life and had somehow found a way to be broken together. It wasn't the fairy tale Wade had once believed in. It was better because it was real. We should probably make this official, Wade said. Get married, I mean, before the town decides we're living in sin. Evelyn laughed. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard from me. Then you'd better try again. Wade took her dirty hands in his. Evelyn Marrow, I'm not good with words and I'm worse with feelings. But you've made my life better in every way that matters. You've made this ranch feel like a home instead of a grave. And I'd like to keep doing this, building something together, fighting for something together, for as long as we both can stand it. Will you marry me? Evelyn's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. That's better. Still not great, but better. Is that a yes? It's a yes, you idiot. Of course it's a yes. Wade kissed her then, dirt and all, and it felt like starting over, like closing one chapter and opening another. They'd survived the immediate crisis, but there would be more. Winter was coming, and with it all the challenges that came with surviving on the frontier. But they'd face it together, and somehow that made all the difference. The wedding happened 2 weeks later in the ranch house, officiated by Reverend Michaels with Rudy and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. It was small and simple, nothing like the elaborate ceremony Wade and Sarah had once had, but it felt right, honest. Two people making a promise they intended to keep, not because it was easy, but because they'd already proven they could survive the hard parts together. Mrs. Chen brought a cake she'd baked herself, and after the ceremony, she pulled Evelyn aside. I have another order for you, she said, 50 shirts this time, and I'm raising your rate to $2.50 per shirt. Evelyn's eyes widened. Why? Because your work is worth it, and because Harold's being an ass about you being in business, so I'm making sure you succeed anyway. Mrs. Chen smiled. Consider it a wedding present. Thank you. That means more than you know. I know exactly what it means. Now go be married. I'll see you next week for the fabric. Winter came hard that year, but Wade and Evelyn weathered it. They rationed supplies, took turns keeping the fire going, and spent long evenings reading to each other while snow piled up outside. Evelyn sewed shirts and Wade repaired equipment, and they talked about plans for spring. The ranch hands stayed through winter, a first for Wade, who usually couldn't afford to keep them on during the slow months. But between Evelyn's sewing income and careful management of resources, they made it work. Rudy became something like family, eating dinner with them most nights and offering advice Wade didn't always want but usually needed. One particularly brutal night in January, with the wind howling and the temperature well below zero, Wade and Evelyn lay in bed listening to the storm rage outside. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked. "Staying here? Marrying me?" "Every day," Evelyn said, and Wade's heart dropped until she continued. "For about 5 seconds every morning when I wake up freezing. Then I remember the alternative was dying alone in Chicago, and suddenly Montana doesn't seem so bad." "That's romantic." "I'm not a romantic person. You knew that when you married me." Wade pulled her closer. "Yeah, I did. And I'm glad." "Me too." They survived January, then February. By March, the worst of winter had passed, and they could start thinking about the future again. Wade ordered seed for crops he wanted to try, hired 2 more hands to help with spring calving, and started planning improvements to the house. "We should add a room," he said one evening, spreading sketches across the kitchen table. "Expand the kitchen, maybe add a proper dining space." Evelyn looked at the drawings. "Why?" "Because we'll need it eventually." "For what?" Wade met her eyes. "For whatever comes next. Family, maybe, or just more space for living." Evelyn was quiet, then said, "I might not be able to have children. I'm 38, Wade. That ship may have sailed." "Then we don't have children, or we do, and it's a miracle. Either way, I want to build something bigger than what we have now. Something that says we're staying, that we believe in a future here. Even though money's tight? Especially because money's tight. If we wait until everything's perfect, we'll never do anything." Evelyn studied the sketches, then nodded. "All right, let's build something." They started construction in April, working alongside hired carpenters to expand the house. It was slow going and expensive, but Wade didn't care. This was an investment in permanence, in the idea that they were building a life that would outlast them. By June, the addition was finished. A proper dining room with windows that let in light, and an extra bedroom that stood empty but hopeful. Evelyn filled the dining room with furniture they bought from a widow selling off her late husband's things, mismatched but functional. The first night they ate dinner in the new room, Wade looked around at what they'd built and felt something like peace. Not happiness exactly. Life was still hard, money was still tight, and the ranch still demanded everything they had. But peace. The knowledge that they'd chosen this, built this, survived this together. "To us," Evelyn said, raising her glass of cheap wine, "for being too stubborn to quit." "To us," Wade echoed, "for being exactly what we needed." As summer stretched on, something shifted in how the town treated them. It started small, Mrs. Pritchard nodding when Evelyn passed on the street instead of turning away. Tom Farley stopping to ask Wade's advice on cattle breeding. The baker saving a loaf for Evelyn when she came in late. By August, the Reverend had invited them both to a church social. Wade wanted to refuse, but Evelyn convinced him to go. "We don't have to stay long," she said, "but we should show up, prove we're not hiding." The social was awkward at first, people unsure how to treat the couple who defied their expectations and survived anyway. But Evelyn moved through the crowd with the same determined grace she brought to everything else, making conversation, refusing to apologize for existing. Wade watched her charm Mrs. Chen and debate cattle prices with the Johnson brothers, and he felt a surge of something that might have been pride or love, or both. This woman had been rejected, dismissed, thrown away, and now she was standing in the center of a community that had tried to exclude her, proving that their opinion had never mattered in the first place. Near the end of the evening, Harold Chen approached them. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I wanted to apologize for how I handled things. The credit situation, the talk around town. It was wrong of me." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, it was." Harold blinked, clearly expecting more. When it didn't come, he nodded awkwardly and walked away. Wade waited until he was out of earshot. "You didn't accept his apology?" "No, because he's not sorry for what he did. He's sorry it didn't work." Evelyn took Wade's arm. "I learned a long time ago that you don't have to forgive people just because they ask. Some things don't deserve forgiveness." Wade couldn't argue with that. They left the social shortly after, driving back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. The house looked different now, bigger, more solid, like something that could withstand whatever came next. Fall brought another cattle sale, and this time Wade got his asking price without a fight. The buyer was the same young man from last year, but his attitude had changed. "Heard you paid everyone back in full after last year," the buyer said. "That's rare these days. Most people just fold when things get hard." "I had help," Wade said, glancing at Evelyn, who'd come along to watch. "Smart man keeping good help." The buyer counted out money. "I'll be back next year. You keep producing quality like this, I'll keep paying fair prices." The profit from that sale gave them the cushion they'd been lacking. Wade paid off the mortgage on one section of land, hired a third permanent hand, and bought Evelyn a new sewing machine, a better model than Mrs. Chen's, one that could handle heavier fabrics. "You didn't have to do this," Evelyn said, running her hands over the machine. "I wanted to. You've earned it 10 times over." "We earned it, together." She was right, of course. Everything they had, everything they'd built, it was theirs. Not his, not hers. Theirs. That winter was easier than the last. They had supplies, money in the bank, and the confidence that comes from surviving something hard and coming out stronger. Wade caught himself laughing more, worrying less. Evelyn seemed lighter too, like she'd finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening in December, Wade found her standing in the doorway of the empty bedroom, one hand on her stomach. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm late," she said quietly. Wade's heart stuttered. "Late for what?" "My monthly. I'm 3 weeks late." They stared at each other, the implications settling over them like snow. After a moment, Wade crossed the room and pulled her close. "Are you sure?" "No, but maybe. I don't know." Evelyn's voice was uncertain in a way Wade had never heard before. "I didn't think it was possible. I thought I was too old. If it's true, if we're—" Wade stopped, not sure how to finish. "Are you scared?" "Terrified. Excited. Both." She looked up at him. "What about you?" Wade thought about it. Thought about the empty room waiting to be filled, about the future they'd been building without knowing exactly what it would look like. Thought about this woman who'd been thrown away and had proven everyone wrong. "I think," he said slowly, "that if we can survive everything else, we can survive this too." Evelyn smiled through tears. "That's not very reassuring. It's the truth. And we've always dealt in truth." They waited another month to be sure, then another month after that. By February, there was no question. Evelyn was pregnant. The doctor in town confirmed it with the kind of surprise usually reserved for miracles. "At your age, Mrs. Mercer, this is highly unusual. You'll need to be careful." "I'm always careful," Evelyn said, which was a lie, but the doctor didn't need to know that. The pregnancy was hard. Evelyn was sick constantly for the first few months, exhausted beyond reason. Wade took over more of the household work, learning to cook beyond heating beans, figuring out laundry through trial and error. The hands pitched in too, Billy proving surprisingly competent at mending, and Tom discovering a talent for bread making. "This is humiliating," Evelyn said one day, watching Tom pull a perfect loaf from the oven. "I'm supposed to be the one who can cook." "You're growing a human," Wade pointed out. "I think you get a pass on bread." By summer, Evelyn had recovered enough to move around normally, though her belly made simple tasks complicated. She kept sewing as long as she could, Mrs. Chen adjusting orders to account for her limitations. The town had rallied in unexpected ways. Women who'd once turned their backs now stopped by with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. "I don't understand it," Evelyn said, folding tiny shirts. 6 months ago, these same women wouldn't speak to me." "People like a story with a happy ending," Rudy said from the doorway. "You two gave them one." "It's not over yet." "No, but you're heading in the right direction." The baby came in September, early morning when the air was just starting to cool. Wade had ridden to town for the doctor, breaking every speed record on the way back. By the time they arrived, Evelyn was in hard labor, Mrs. Chen having shown up unbidden to help. The birth was long and difficult. Wade paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Evelyn's screams and feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. This was one thing he couldn't fix, couldn't work harder at, couldn't solve through stubbornness. When the baby finally came, a girl, tiny and furious, Wade was allowed in to see them. Evelyn looked exhausted, pale, and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. She held their daughter with the careful grip of someone who couldn't quite believe what they were holding. "She's perfect," Evelyn whispered. She's ours, Wade said, and that felt more important. They named her Margaret, after Evelyn's mother. She was a difficult baby, colicky, fussy, refusing to sleep for more than an hour at a time. Wade and Evelyn took turns walking her around the house at 3 in the morning, both of them half dead from exhaustion, but refusing to complain. "This is harder than ranching," Wade said one particularly brutal night. "This is harder than everything," Evelyn agreed. "But look at her. She's fighting to exist just like we did." And she was. Margaret had her mother's stubbornness and her father's refusal to quit. By 3 months, she'd settled into something resembling a routine. By 6 months, she was smiling and grabbing at everything in reach. The ranch prospered in small ways. Not spectacularly. They'd never be wealthy, never live easy. But they were stable. The debts were paid, the accounts balanced, the future secured through hard work and partnership. Wade hired 2 more hands and started breeding horses alongside cattle, diversifying in case one market went bad. Evelyn went back to sewing when Margaret was old enough, Mrs. Chen providing a steady stream of orders. She worked with the baby strapped to her back, singing old factory songs while the machine whirred. Some days were harder than others, but they managed. On Margaret's first birthday, they threw a party. It was small. Rudy and the Hands, Mrs. Chen and her husband, a few other townsfolk who'd proven themselves friends. The Reverend came and blessed the meal, and even Mrs. Pritchard showed up with a knitted blanket. Wade stood on the porch watching everyone gathered in his yard, eating food prepared in his kitchen, celebrating a life that almost hadn't happened. Evelyn appeared at his elbow, Margaret balanced on her hip. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That we got lucky. Against all odds, we got incredibly lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. We fought for this." "Both can be true." Evelyn smiled. "Yeah, I guess they can." Margaret reached for Wade, and he took her, marveling at how solid she felt. This tiny person who existed because he'd made a reckless choice on a train platform, because Evelyn had chosen to stay, because they'd both refused to accept the story other people tried to write for them. "You know what I think?" Wade said. "I think the whole world's set up to tell people like us we don't matter. That we're too old, too broken, too late to build anything worth keeping. And I think the best thing we ever did was prove them wrong." "Is this the part where you get philosophical?" "Maybe. Is it working?" "Not really, but I appreciate the effort." Wade laughed, and Margaret laughed with him, and Evelyn joined in. They stood there together on the porch of a house they'd built through stubbornness and spite, surrounded by a community that had learned to accept them, raising a daughter who would never know what it felt like to be told she didn't matter. Years would pass. There would be hard winters and dry summers, cattle that died and crops that failed. Margaret would grow up wild and fierce, running through the same grassland her mother had learned to love. Wade and Evelyn would grow old together, their bodies wearing down but their partnership holding strong. The ranch would survive. Not because it was easy or because they were special, but because they'd decided it was worth saving and then did the work to make that decision true. And on quiet nights when the wind howled down from the mountains and the stars blazed overhead, Wade would look at Evelyn, gray-haired and wrinkled and still stubborn as hell, and think about that woman on the train platform, the one the world had thrown away, the one he'd chosen anyway, best decision he'd ever made. They'd both been broken when they found each other, sharp edges and old wounds. But broken things could still be useful. Broken things could still build something new. And sometimes the only difference between a failure and a future was the stubborn refusal to accept that you were finished. Wade and Evelyn had refused. And in refusing, they'd written their own ending, not the one the agency wanted, not the one the town expected, but the one they'd earned through every hard choice and harder day. They'd survived. They'd built something. And that, Wade thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.